Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Dan Kwan and I am a professional software engineer based in New York City. Welcome to my channel. Thanks for watching. In this series, I'm going to cover how to break into the tech industry from scratch, which is what I did starting 8 years ago, and how to approach it, your training and what things to study, what areas to focus on, and how to maximize your odds of success as breaking into the tech industry as a newcomer, like I did 8 years ago. So there's a lot of things to consider. The environment's a little bit different today than it was 8 years ago, but the basic principles are maintained, which is basically study the hard things, put yourself out there, and communicate your value um, as clearly as you can. It's no different than any other industry in that regard. So in this series, we're going to break down some basic concepts, what to study, what you should focus on and why, what you should avoid, typical mistakes to avoid, and how to get started as a programmer once you've done your training and how to approach your career. So you may be wondering why I have this website up on my computer right now. Asshole Consulting is a website run by a person named Aaron Clary. That's this guy right here. And he takes questions on his website pertaining to anything, career, finances, personal relationships, even like health and fitness and diet, things like that. And he gives you a straightforward answer as to how you should handle your situation. Aaron has a lot of wisdom. He shares a lot of advice that I agree with. And he's also been gracious enough to host this series on his channel as well. So that's why I'm pointing him out. I'd like to thank him for that. You should also watch his channel. It's very good. I obviously watch it. That's why I know about it. And his advice is pretty much on point. And a lot of what I sort of ascribe to and what I advise in my channel overlaps with what Aaron says. Not on purpose. We just see things the same way. So I definitely agree with his perspective, and I do think you should take a look at his content and hopefully contact him for some feedback on your situation. So in this series, we're going to go through some basic, and not to forget my own stuff. Here's my website. So this is my business, turbo360.co, where we do essentially two things. We teach people programming, so that's why I'm running this series. We teach people how to become good programmers from a beginner level to a professional level like myself. So if you go through here, you'll see a ton of tutorials. We even get into some of the business side, like guide to freelancing, how to break into freelancing, how to negotiate contracts, how to find clients, how to close deals, things like that. And then we also get into some basic tutorials from beginner all the way up to advanced. Most of these are done by me, but I've also hired a couple other people to help out in other areas as well. It is free, but for a premium membership, you also get more content. You get more exclusive tutorials that have much more higher level concepts covered, and you get a lot more access to material as well as interaction with me. So if you have any questions or anything like that, I get emails probably almost as often as Aaron, um, asking how do I do this or how should I approach this job situation, things like that. So that's my business. This series will be summarized on this website. So I don't have this series pre-written. I have just some basic notes that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to use these notes to describe the content, to put out the content. But then I have another person I've hired to take these videos and transcribe them into written blog posts into a summary that will end up on this website. So if you don't want to watch all the videos, or if you just don't like my face, that's fine. You can just go on my website and all the content will be summarized on the website as well after each video is published. So I record the video, I pass it off to my assistant, he transcribes it into a nice long blog post, he puts it up, and then the videos go up, and that's how it works. So if you'd rather read it, it'll be up on this website. Pretty much if you're watching this, that means it's already up on the website. So check out the website for that, and yeah, that's it. So to begin, we're going to discuss the basic areas of coding or tech that you need to understand as a newcomer. Obviously, tech has a myriad of different areas that you can pursue, and it can be overwhelming, and it's very easy to make the wrong choice, or at least not the best choice for you. So I'm going to explain the three main areas right now. There are obviously more than three, but the three that you need to be aware of as a beginner in technology. And those break down into these three: front end, back end, and mobile phones. So let's discuss each one very briefly, and then in the follow-up videos, in the subsequent videos, I'm going to explain each one in much more specific detail, with maybe even some coding examples. So let's begin with front end. The front end is pretty much what you think it sounds like. It's the front. It's what you see. It's the visual components of a website, typically a website. So the front end is the visual structure of the product, and the front end is developed by front end developers, obviously, and that's typically done through the following: HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Those three are definite mandatories. jQuery, which is a JavaScript library, and Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework, or some people call it a library. It doesn't really matter. So at a minimum, those 5 things are the requisite skills you need to study the front end, to master the front end. The front end extends much further than that. I will describe that in a subsequent video. But at a bare minimum, you have to know those 5 core areas. Most courses, coding courses, boot camps, online development courses, they begin on the front end because it's the easiest. As simple as that. The front end is the easiest skill to pick up. So people tend to break in on the front end because you get the most immediate satisfaction, kind of. But you have to understand the market implications of that as well. Because the front end is the easiest, you get a lot more people doing just the front end, and as a result, you get a much larger pool of developers on the front end. And so what that means is you need to do a lot more to distinguish yourself. The bar is raised as a result of that. You also get a lot more people who are just not good at it. So you're dealing with a lower caliber of individual, generally speaking, because they're limited by their ability, so they can't get into harder things like the back end, native mobile development, or even more sophisticated front end. Like, we'll discuss that in another video, but the front end gets very difficult once you get past the basic stages. So if you stick with only those 5 skills, those 5 core skills, you're not going to make it very far. You're not going to do what you want to do, which is make a lot of money. That won't do. But you do need to master those 5 to get to the next level. So that's the front end. Just to show you some quick basic front end. Here's the front end HTML, CSS, JavaScript of my website. I wrote all this front end markdown or markup. I can never remember which one it is. So all this markup code is the front end code that visually results in this website right here, right? And this includes the CSS. This is all the CSS. Here's some CSS code. And yes, I did write this. And there's some JavaScript down here. Well, not all of it. A lot of that's Bootstrap. Here's some basic JavaScript right here. This I did write because this is custom code. So, that's it. That's the JavaScript, HTML, CSS, jQuery, stuff like that. So that's the front end, and that's it. So the next thing is the back end. So the back end is where the data is primarily stored and manipulated on the back end. So for example, the back end delivers data to the front end so that the front end has something to actually show. So if you look at these tutorials right here, these tutorials come from a database, and the database the data is requested from the back end and then delivered to the front end, which now ends up right here on this website. Right? And that's a typical architectural structure. That's called client-server architecture. Client-server architecture. That's a key phrase that's worth knowing in this environment. That's like very standard terminology. It's kind of like a 4-3 defense in football versus 3-4 defense. Like if you don't know the difference between those two, then you just don't follow football, and that's fine. But like if you say you follow football and you don't know the difference, then you're sort of exposed as a fraud. So this is client-server architecture. So here, If I go to the contact page on Aaron's site, and I want to contact him, this is how I contacted Mr. Clary. I filled out this form, and that's how most of his people contact him. And I fill out this information, and then I press submit, right, or send. That data is packaged and sent to the backend. And then the backend typically does something like store it in a database, which might be a SQL server, a SQL database, SQL, or sometimes Mongo. In this case, I'm positive it's SQL. And then the backend then returns data back to the front end, some sort of confirmation saying we received your message, thank you. And then the front end will send like a confirmation visually to the human being. It'll show a pop-up saying, thanks, we got it, we'll be in touch with you. Because I want to be consistent with my terminology, I'm from now on, I'm going to call the front end the client. Okay, that's what tech people call front end, is the client. So you would rarely see a computer person call the browser a front end or a browser. He would call it the client. So the back end sends data to the client, and then the client renders, that's the word for show, renders some sort of confirmation that's typically human readable, like a thank you pop-up saying, thank you, we got your message, we'll be in touch, or something went wrong or something along those lines, okay? And that's how that works. So that's the front-end, back-end client-server architecture, and the back-end developers are responsible for creating the systems through which that data is manipulated and stored. The back-end, like I said earlier, it spans a much broader spectrum of possibilities. So in the front end, you have basically the 5 core areas I pointed out: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, Bootstrap. Those are at minimum, you have to know that for the front end. Back end, not so much. In the back end, there's way more, and it's not as strictly defined. Like there's several different backend frameworks. You can have Ruby on Rails, Node Express, Python Django, Flask, PHP Laravel, .NET. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot more. Those are all different ways of doing the same thing. You can have different databases, Mongo, Postgres. You can use what's called the Amazon RDS, which is a variation of Postgres. DynamoDB, which is also a Mongo variation on Amazon. Redis, there's many different database structures. And there's no like set way, like this is how you do this, and you kind of have to, it's more of an art than a science. That said, there are key factors that you have to take under consideration when making certain decisions. And I'll describe those in greater detail in a follow-up installment of the series. I don't want to get into that here. This is just a basic introduction. So that's the back end. Next is mobile. Obviously mobile, so that's your phone, iPhone, Android, mobile. Mobile development is obviously a more recent player in this ecosystem, given that iPhone came out about 10 years ago. So, but clearly it's a major player. So if you can carve out an entire career just being a mobile developer, and that's fine. That could actually pay out pretty well, especially if you're a good iOS developer at a high company like Facebook or Uber, or maybe not Uber, but Airbnb. You're easily going to make $250K, if not more than that, within 5 years. That's like easily you'll clear that. So that's mobile development, and those are the 3 main areas. Mobile development, by the way, is how I broke into the industry. So in 2010, I was not a programmer. I was a high school math teacher. I was teaching like AP stats and calculus, stuff like that. I hated it. It was a terrible job. I shouldn't have done it. And so I realized that if I wanted to not teach for the rest of my life, I had to figure out something quickly. So I taught myself iOS development because it was pretty obvious that at that point, 2010, that iPhone was going to be a big thing for quite some time, conceivably the rest of my life. So I figured that if I wanted to carve out a place in the future for myself, that would be a good place to begin. So I taught myself iOS development, and I did that for about 3 years, 3 years, before I started picking up other areas. Speaking of other areas, I want to cover a couple other things that are worth mentioning, but I'm not going to describe them in great detail in this series, mostly because they're too hard. They get way too deep, but they're worth mentioning because they pay very, very well. So the next one is what's called DevOps. So DevOps. DevOps are people who do DevOps, maintain and manage servers and configurations such that your architectural system is sound, is sturdy and reliable. So let me give you an example. Um, let's say you run a website that's hosted on one server in your office, which people used to do back in the day, right? One server is hosting your entire website in your office somewhere. And then one day, Taylor Swift decides she's going to Instagram about your website because she likes the colors or whatever, and then you get 10 million hits in under an hour. Well, your server is not going to be able to handle that. Your server will crash, and you will not have a website at that point, and all that traffic will be gone. You will have wasted the opportunity. So the people who prevent that from happening are DevOps people. And today, that scenario wouldn't even come close to happening. You wouldn't have a server physically, probably at least. You would have what's called a virtual server in the cloud, typically Amazon, AWS services. A lot of people don't know Amazon is a major player in the DevOps game and just the internet in general. Forget the food delivery and stuff in the books. The setting up, like for example, Netflix runs a lot of their infrastructure on Amazon, AWS. Another option is Google Cloud Services, which is becoming very, very popular lately. There are other players are DigitalOcean, as well as Rackspace, people like companies like that. Turbo is not really a DevOps company, but we do some very light DevOps services. You can deploy your website on Turbo, on my website Turbo. We host and maintain server configurations with database connections and whatnot. So I built Turbo last year for a number of reasons, for helping people to learn how to program, as well as creating an infrastructure through which people can deploy their websites. So Turbo is deployed on Turbo. Yeah, it's a little bit of, it's kind of meta, but it works. The underlying architecture of Turbo is all AWS. So Turbo is 100% AWS deployment architecture using what's called Lambda. I mean, if you're non-technical, you won't know any of this, but we use a lot of Lambda and what's called the API gateway, and it gets into pretty serious stuff. So that's DevOps. So another thing that's worth pointing out is data science, as well as artificial intelligence. Now, we will certainly not cover that in this series because I don't do either one of those, so I can't even speak in too much detail on that, other than you need to have a good grasp on math and statistics, and as well as Python, because they all use Python packages. So Python is the language to learn for that. And definitely a good thing to learn to get into these days is cryptocurrency stuff and blockchain technology, especially blockchain. So you want to learn how that works as well. Blockchain isn't the hardest thing to figure out, though. It's something that you can learn in a reasonable amount of time. So that would be a good thing to get into if you're just now breaking into the industry. So those are some areas that are worth researching in terms of what you want to study, what you want to try and break into professionally. And in the following videos, we will discuss each area in much greater detail, discuss the basic layout of the land, and how to decide what's worth looking into and what's not, how to even decide whether or not programming is for you. It's definitely worth pointing out that a lot of people are trying to break into programming who should not be doing this. They have no idea what they're getting into, and they have no idea how ill-prepared they are. And they're only going to find out the hard way. And I'll explain in the next video exactly how that looks. That's going to be video 2. It's how to even know this is something you really want to do. Because if you go into this half-heartedly, it's going to be a miserable experience. And I'll explain why in video 2. So hopefully that was a good rundown of the series and what we're going to cover. Hopefully you find that intriguing enough to keep watching. And If you have any questions or any comments, feel free to contact me. I think the best way is going to be, the best way is to sign up for Turbo, and then automatically you will receive an invitation to my Slack channel. And then I'm on Slack pretty much every day, so you can just contact me on Slack, and that's what people do on Slack every day anyway. And then you can, whatever questions you have, whatever, you can contact me there. And again, if you're watching this on my channel, check out Aaron Clary. He has a lot of good advice again. That's people ask me a lot of questions that really shouldn't, it's not really programming related, how should I prepare for a job, and how should I follow. One guy asked me, how should I follow up with a job interview, as if like, why are you even asking me these questions? Like, I'm not like I'm a programmer, right? But furthermore, that's a very basic level question. Like, you should know by now that to follow up with a job interview, like you send an email saying, thanks for taking the time today. I enjoyed learning about your company. If you have any other questions or need some references, let me know. Like, this is basic stuff. But a lot of people are asking me basic questions, like how do I find like good job opportunities and stuff like that. And if you're asking those kinds of questions, I'm not even the man for you, to be honest, because that's so entry level, and it's not really, I'm not a career coach, is what I'm trying to say, and I'm a programmer, and if you're a really, really good programmer, which I like to think that I am, those issues don't even come up. Getting work for me is not even, I just don't sweat it. It's really easy, and to the point where I'm turning away work. Like, I've turned down several gigs in the past few months because the contract work was inundated, and I didn't straight up turn them down. I passed. What you want to do at the next level, once you get to senior levels, you don't want to just straight up turn down work. You want to pass it off for commission. So I'm still making commissions off that work. So even though I'm not doing anything, I'm making commissions off it. And you want to get to that level, right? And so like I'm not really at a point anymore. I'm thinking like, how do I even find jobs, or like, should I follow up with this person, or is this a good lead, things like that. Like, I'm not saying Aaron's the right guy for that, but my point is that Aaron can cover a lot broader spectrum of those kinds of questions, like, is programming for me, or that kind of thing. Well, anyway, hopefully I didn't ramble too much, and in the next video we're going to discuss exactly that. Is programming for you? How can you tell? And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the actual areas that I described earlier. So hopefully you will watch, and thanks for watching video 1, and I'll see you in video 2.